I want to give you an update on ULA. The United Launch Alliance is a rocket manufacturer in the North Alabama area, and they have been at the center of controversy over the past month or two about the vaccine mandate, which is a little strange because they can't be the only folks enforcing the mandate. Like, can they? I mean, I don't know. But I haven't seen very much about any other employers, but ULA has been kind of all over the news. We spoke to David Story, a founding father of the Valley Labor Report and currently the president of the union that represents manufacturing workers there. We talked to him last week. You can find that conversation online if you'd like to see it. But the big update is that since our conversation, a federal judge ruled against 5 ULA employees in their lawsuit against the company. When speaking to David this week after the ruling was handed down, he told me that is why they tell members to file suit as a last resort, and that's because they're in the middle of arbitration right now. The union has negotiated an arbitration process, and they're before an arbitrator. And having a federal judge having already ruled in favor of the company is going to make arbitration much more difficult for the workers to win. Therefore, David is pessimistic at this point at their chances of being reinstated. They're not terminated as of yet. They are on unpaid administrative leave. They do still have their health care, but he's pessimistic about their chances of reinstated, though the union will continue to exercise all avenues available to protect the jobs of those workers through arbitration and through the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board Unfair Labor Practices process. They filed a ULP several weeks ago. Now, I'm really kind of confused about all of this, and I'll tell you why. The suit seemed to me to circle around primarily religious exemptions. Saying that the vaccine was manufactured and or tested on cell lines derived from stem cells of aborted fetuses. And there was one medical claim that was something about like a general anxiety disorder. That's very strange. And those are obviously like pretty weak arguments, right, as to why you should not be fired, especially in an at-will employment state like Alabama, where you can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. So, that, though the arguments presented in the lawsuit are kind of strange, it seems to me. I think that kind of tracks with the lawyer's track record. My understanding is that he's a very kind of eclectic. I think he works for the Foundation of Moral Law, like Roy Moore's organization. I think. To me, the strong argument is that the workers and the company had already made an agreement on reasonable accommodations. I got the contract language from David. And look, none of the contract specifically commits the company to accept any accommodations, but there is a process laid out, a very specific process laid out for both medical and religious accommodations. And if the company agreed to that process, they signed their name on the dotted lines in black and white, saying that this is the process by which workers will request accommodations, medically or otherwise. If they agreed to that process with no intent to grant any exemptions, which seems to be the case, because there were 13 requests for accommodations filed among the workforce of 350. There were only 13 that requested accommodations, and not a single one was granted. That's why an unfair labor practice was filed against the company, and the union is going through arbitration. And let's take a look at some of these folks who have requested medical exemption. One fellow has leukemia. He has had COVID, and his doctor advised him not to get the vaccine, and he had an antibody test showing that he still had the antibodies. the contract language agreed to by the company even said that you would not even have to be tested if you had good results on an antibody test and you haven't had the vaccine. Another of these people requesting medical exemption has cancer. He's been going through chemotherapy for several months, and his doctor also advised him not to get the vaccine. And there are 2 or 3 other people that fall into categories such as that. And if these folks don't if they don't qualify for medical exemptions, then nobody would, right? Nobody would. And that is totally anti-science, because nobody in the scientific community has said that every single person needs to get vaccinated. Nobody has said 100% of the United States population needs to get vaccinated. In fact, and that's never been the case with any vaccine. In fact, one of the reasons why it is so important for people to get vaccinated who can be vaccinated, people like myself, my brother Adam, the fellow who works here at Spice Radio, Ben, the reason it's so important for folks like us to get vaccinated is to help protect the people like the brother with leukemia and cancer who can't get vaccinated safely at this point. That's one of the reasons why it's so important for people who can get vaccinated to get vaccinated, is because there is always, with any vaccine, a subset of the population for whom it is not safe to get vaccinated. And if the company is not willing to make accommodations for people like that, I mean, there's no sense in it. It does not make any sense. And they agreed to a process for accommodations. But instead of granting these accommodations, which are very reasonable, I think, like exceedingly reasonable, instead of granting those accommodations, they want to terminate every single one of these employees. And they did this. They placed the fellow with leukemia on unpaid administrative leave the week before Thanksgiving. They're doing this before the holidays. There's no reason for it. So look, this lawsuit that was filed that the judge ruled in favor of the company, it doesn't seem to me like they put their best foot forward. The best foot seems to me to be that the company agreed to a process for making accommodations for workers, and they are completely ignoring their commitment, written in black and white, where they signed on the dotted line. And for what purpose? We're talking 13 people out of a bargaining unit of 350. Having them get vaccinated will not make the workplace measurably safer. And of course, ULA doesn't care about that. These people worked at the work site during the pandemic for 2 years while the bosses worked from home in their living rooms in their pajamas. The workers took care of each other, following precautions well enough that there has not been a single outbreak at the facility. Is it cost that's making them terminate these employees? No, of course not, because weekly tests and masks for 13 people is a drop in the bucket in the budget of United Launch Alliance. And compared to the costs of hiring cops to stand guard outside the facility after the protests against the mandate, there's just like the cost is infinitesimal when you compare it to the cost of hiring cops to stand outside and threaten and intimidate employees who have exercised their right to protest. I can't think of anything other than vindictiveness that motivates them to do this, frankly. And something that the judge says is that the workers did not prove that the harm done to them by losing a job is going to be more than the harm done to the company by keeping unvaccinated people employed. And that just doesn't make sense, because of course, it is worse for a working person to be without a job than for the company to have to pay for tests. Good grief. And frankly, that doesn't even matter. The burden that it places on the company is irrelevant when they have agreed to do a thing. I do not as an individual consumer, get to agree to something like a mortgage or student loans and say, oh, man, the burden is too high. I'm just not going to pay it, and then have a federal judge rule in my favor. That is a privilege that is only given to the bosses, of course. So we're supporting David and the folks at ULA, and we're going to keep you updated. And you know, like I said, David and the union they're going to be fighting this. They're going to be taking it all the way. And I may be a bit more hopeful than David, of course. I mean, David's got more experience in this kind of stuff, so he, you know. But I don't understand how you can, like, how the National Labor Relations Board is going to rule in favor of the company when the company clearly agreed to a process for accommodations for workers for this. Like, I don't see how they lose. But, you know, I mean, it's the boss's courts. I will say, to close this out, as I was preparing for today, I thought I would check and see what conservative outlets are saying about this. And you would think they'd be all over it. I figured they would be, actually. I figured that most of the articles that I was going to find on this would be coming from, say, Yellowhammer News or 1819 News, which are two of the, you know, maybe larger conservative propaganda sites. And I couldn't find a single article on Yellowhammer News or 1819, which did surprise me, and you don't hear a lot about it on the radio, but you do see ULA press releases reprinted in full in Yellowhammer News, and if you go to Yellowhammer News, the homepage, you do see lots of ULA ads. So do with that information what you will. Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that before we go to the next story?
No, I just think it's a really good example of why it's important to have a union in the workplace, even with a daunting fight ahead of them. At least they do have a fight, and without that union, they're not going to have any chance of trying to protect themselves and get reinstated.
Right.
And I think it's what you said at the top of the segment is so important. This is why healthy folks who can get the vaccine should get the vaccine to protect those people who cannot. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's to request that your employer actually bargains with the employees and, executes mandates from the government if and when they come down in a way that's actually collaborative with the workers. That's right. Not being anti-vax or anti-mandate by any means.
No, it's not at all. And I don't want people to get, like, the wrong impression at all.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah,
it's important to say we're very pro-vaccine. The union is very pro-vaccine. They have been, before the mandate ever came out, strongly encouraging their members to get vaccinated, and they have been successful. The vaccination rate among bargaining unit employees at ULA is 97%.
Wow.
97% of the 350 people that are represented by the Machinists Union, Local 44. Only 13 of them requested accommodations, many of them for medical reasons, some for religious reasons. The religious reasons are, frankly, less sympathetic and honestly a bit silly. But the medical exemptions are very, very legitimate.
But, the company did agree.
The company agreed to it.
To have an accommodation and exemption process. So there again, companies can put whatever they want on paper, but unless you have the means to enforce that language and hold them accountable for violating it, what's it good for?
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.